Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in our chats with Emily as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We turn now in the Johnson edition to poem 426, It Don't Sound So Terrible Quite As It Did. Now, this is an interesting poem because scholars are kind of split. Some see this as one of the few poems referencing the Civil War, and more particularly the loss of Austin, Emily's brother's close friend. In some ways, we're back to poem 409. We reference that as a possible Civil War poem. Or this is just another riddle poem because we're not completely sure what it is that she's referencing in this poem. Our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist. I'm hopeful that you've worked through our set of introductory comments. I'm hopeful that you've read the preceding 425 poems. We just finished with 425, Good Morning Midnight. Now, there is an understanding by a number of scholars that what we're looking at here is in fact one of the actual deaths that affected Emily and of course the extended family, Lieutenant Fraser Stearns. We've mentioned him already when we did poem 409. We'll review again. Stearns was the son of the president of Amherst Academy. He was killed in action during the Civil War on 14 March of 1862. In a letter 256, to Sam Boyles, Emily wrote, quote, Austin is chilled by Fraser's murder. Austin, of course, Emily's brother. Austin is chilled by Fraser's murder. He says his brain keeps saying over, Fraser is killed, Fraser is killed, just as father told it. The second and the last lines of this poem 426 does echo so strongly the wording of that letter. The poem almost certainly reflects on the same death. Here I'm quoting the great scholar David Priest. As we look then at this poem, some have seen this as Emily's trying to come to terms with the fact that young Fraser is dead, was murdered. There is another reading of this poem, though, by especially a scholar who believes that Emily struggled with certain kinds of fits or seizures, and that's what she's in fact referencing here. I'll leave it to you to decide. It don't sound so terrible, quite as it did. I run it over. Dead brain. Dead. Put it in Latin left of my school. Seems it don't shriek so under rule. Turn it a little full in the face. The trouble looks bitterest. Shift it just. Say, when tomorrow comes this way, I shall have weighted down one day. I suppose it will interrupt me some till I get accustomed. But then the tomb, like other new things, shows largest then, and smaller by habit. It's shrewder then. Put the thought in advance. A year, how like a fit then. Murder, where? Now, I think both interpretations can work for this if you accept that Emily struggled with certain kinds of fits or seizures, and that was troubling, disturbing for her. I think, though, that the idea that this is a response to the death of young Fraser is a good interpretation as well. And obviously some of the lines from that letter make it directly into this poem. Notice it isn't clear what the antecedent of the pronoun it is. It don't sound so terrible. By the way, notice the grammar here, the informal grammar. It should be doesn't sound, right? It don't sound so terrible, dash, quiet, dash, as it did. In other words, this for sure is a poem about coming to terms with bad news. It takes time to do it, right? I run it over, and then notice dash, quotation mark, dead, right, in quotation marks, then comma, brain. This is where some have seen the possibility of referencing seizures, and then again dead. But we understand that it could easily be I'm dealing with it in my brain over and over again. And of course, as she said about her brother Fraser, that, or her brother Austin, that dealing with Fraser's death, that's kind of how she phrased it. Put it in Latin, and here of course it would be the mortas, the word for death. Left of my school seems it don't shriek so under rule. In other words, you can change the language of death to begin to grow, she'll use the word accustomed here in a bit. Turn it a little, always for Emily about perspective, right? Full in the face, a trouble looks bitterest. Shift it just. Say, quote, when tomorrow comes this way, I shall have weighted down one day, end quote. In other words, over time, I'll be, if I can just get through the next day, the next day, the next day. And of course, if you're dealing with a tragic loss, death, this is one way, of course, that we go through the grieving process, correct? And then she'll say, I suppose, and again, the informal language here is quite remarkable. We called our series Chats with Emily for a number of reasons. One is a poem like this, where she'll say, I suppose it will interrupt me some, till I get accustomed. Again, what the it is, it's not clear. She'll call it a fit here in a second. But then the tomb, like other new things, notice capitalized, shows largest then and smaller by habit. Now, accustomed will take us back to 419. We grow accustomed to the dark. And I think her use of the word habit capitalized here is significant. For Emily, so much of her life is understood through the rhythms that she created. There are some who argue this is why she withdrew and became what some have called a recluse. That is to say, she wanted the habits to become incredibly simple. What is it a contemporary Thoreau will say in Walden? Simplify, 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 right? That idea of reducing down. She says, it can become habitual, and then after time I'll be able to deal with this. If it's, or she says it this way, it's shrewder then. By the way, the use of this word shrewder is most likely harmful or injurious. It's shrewder than put the thought in advance. In other words, preparing. A year from now, how like a fit, and then the use of that word fit, then, when, in other words, the tomb is new, is one interpretation. Murder, of course, she'll use that very word in the letter that we referenced, where, exclamation point. What is it that really Emily is arguing here? However you interpret this poem, I think the point is that proper grieving does take time. I think that's the point that she's making. At 2b, well, this is a riddle poem, no doubt. At 3a, we have the other quote-unquote war poems that can be read adjacent to this. Poems 409. When we get to 596 and 444, we'll play similar kinds of games, trying to see if, in fact, she's referencing the Civil War and the battles of the Civil War in those poems. Finally, at 3b, what was a time when you had to grieve, when you just had to get through the next day, and that's the best that you could do? Thank you.